Well, this morning we are continuing in our God Against All Odds series in the book of Acts. And because this is part 2 of a message we began last week, I'm wearing the same shirt for continuity. So you can watch part 1 and 2 and think, that was all just one big piece. By show of hands, who here, especially among the older crowd, ever watched the TV show Matlock? Matlock, yeah. Some of the younger ones are thinking, write it down, better check it out. So my mom quite enjoyed the show Matlock. It was about a very expensive, older defense criminal attorney. So criminal defense attorney that sometimes worked pro bono if he decided to, like no charge. But other times he charged. And I went back and checked. Back in the 80s, it was $100,000 US minimum to be hired by this guy. He was an older attorney played by Andy Griffith. But the feature of this show was that every single time it ended the same way. So he would defend someone who was accused of murder, but he would then solve the crime by finding the killer, solving the crime, and getting his client off every time. For 10 years. Find the killer, solve the case, and get his client off every time. Now, if I'd ever asked my mom, and I didn't do this, but if I'd ever asked her, Mom, why do you watch Matlock every week? I mean, it's so predictable. You know how it's going to end. You know he's going to win. You know what she would have said? She would have said, my dear, you don't watch Matlock to see if he's going to win. You watch Matlock to see how's he going to pull it off this time. And that's why we're in this book of Acts. Every week, we look at God against all odds, and we think, how is he going to pull it off this time? But he does. Every time. It never gets old. So we're going to see how he does it again this week. In part 2 of a message called Paul in Athens, Unknown God Discovered. I heard a pastor named Perry Noble say something that when I first heard it, I thought, is that heresy? Is that heretical, what he just said? But after careful, thoughtful reflection, I don't believe it is, and I'm going to repeat him this morning because it's profoundly thought-provoking and entirely relevant to our message. And now that you're fully awake, because I've said that, I should have really saved a statement like that for later when some of you are asleep. Right now you're just nervous. What's he going to say? But here's the statement. Now note, I added one word. You'll see it in square brackets. Okay, I added one word here. He said this, may we never be a church so inappropriately focused on Jesus that we lose sight of the focus of Jesus. May we never be a church so inappropriately focused on Jesus that we lose sight of the focus of Jesus. A focus on Jesus, a focus on God the Father, on Holy Spirit, ought to always cause us to not lose sight of the focus of Jesus. But it can. It can. Not unlike Bible study that can become its own goal. And when it does, we're in danger of not also walking out what we learn in God's Word. Is that not true? So what was the focus of Jesus? Well, you might be thinking, well, it was to preach the gospel. Well, it was bigger than that. His focus was to obey his Father and to do his will. Not in theory, but in practice. To obey his Father and to do his will. And that involved living out the great commandment of loving God and loving people. Jesus loved people so much that he was willing to get uncomfortable. And that's what we've been seeing about Paul the Apostle in Acts. He loved people so much that he was willing to get uncomfortable. Do you love people enough to get uncomfortable? I've been asking that of myself. See, these are the words of Jesus. I have come to seek and to save those who are lost. If that same Jesus resides on the inside of my life, his mission has not changed one little bit. He's come to get uncomfortable, for us to get uncomfortable by seeking and saving the lost. So, disciples of Jesus who are here today, I hope you feel that in your soul every day, because that's what Jesus wants to do. And if so, we have to adapt our messaging. How do we invite people up onto the front porch? Remember that imagery from last week? And how are we careful so that they can relate to what we're saying and doing? So last Sunday we laid the groundwork for that, and we walked through Acts 17, 16 to 22. And there we saw the culture of Athens, that though it's very different, it's also amazingly similar to the culture that we find here in Kitchener-Waterloo. Many, many idols. I won't go over that again, but again, if you missed last Sunday's message, do check it out on the website. And we've reached the moment when Paul now begins to speak to the Athenians. And what we want to do this morning is we want to observe the way he communicates the gospel, the way he evangelizes. That word evangelism in our culture is not always the greatest word, but it simply means to proclaim, to herald the good news of Jesus. And so there's a roadmap here for us today. And can I say this? Today is going to be practical. It's going to be practical. So you might want to take notes. You don't have to, but you might want to. So first of all, begin where they are. Begin where they are, where people are. And we see this in verse 22. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." This is a great approach. Like, just think about the setting here. Paul says, I'm looking around at all the temples and all the statues and idols. Y'all are over the top with your idols, right? 30,000 idols in the city, another 30,000 in the Parthenon. So many idols. And he says, so I'm pretty sure you're quite religious. It's brilliant. Because they're not offended by this. They're thinking, yes, we are. We like this guy. He gets us. He feels us. We're religious. Now, FYI, Paul, in saying this, does not mean that he believes it's okay to be religious. He's not saying, I see you're religious, everyone should be religious. That's not what he's saying. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, I see all those idols, you bunch of hell-bound, heathen, pagan, idol worshippers. You say, now, Gord, no one would do that. It is something like what I heard when I walked into Daytona Speedway in Florida for the Daytona 500 car race back in 2017. There were two guys yelling out their gospel warnings to all of us who were entering, and they held high their turn or burn signs. I'm not joking. Not to mention how unlike Jesus it was and it felt. Their messaging was completely irrelevant. In fact, I was thinking, I wonder if people who've never heard the words turn or burn are thinking, well, of course, that's what NASCAR does. You're always turning left. If you don't, you could burn. The Daytona 500 is 500 miles of turning left. Now, occasionally it would be kind of fun to watch someone turn right? But it is turn or burn. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's what their sign says. Paul has a couple of options here. He either says, you bunch of idol worshippers, repent. Like, that could have been his leading line. Or it was what he led with. He says, I see that you're spiritual people. You're spiritual people. And he's going to go on to say, God knows that about you because he made you that way. God is big and sovereign and our creator, but what he really wants to get across is he's knowable. He's knowable, and he knows us. And so he begins where they're at. So let's talk about this. He calls them very religious. Religion is about what we saw last week, a search for God. It's a search for God. It is our human-sourced, systematic way to reach up to God and give ourselves to something, namely following that system with the belief that it will get us to God. Religion always starts with us. It always starts with us. And that is why, sincerely, that is why Christian faith is not a religion. Oh, people have turned it into a religion. But in the purest sense, Christian faith is about God reaching down to us through giving himself to us. It's a relationship, not a program to merit God's favor. Do you see the difference? Begin where people are. The next concept drills down into that idea. It's this: use the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar. And we see it in verse 23. Paul says, "For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." Notice the willingness of Paul to do the work here. He says, I was walking around, so you might think, well, just a tourist, looking carefully at their objects of worship. Paul wants to understand their context. Why? Because he's a missionary. That's what missionaries do. They understand their context. We need to care enough about the people here in KW to understand our context. I know many of you know that for years Karen and I were in student ministry. And I continually talk to those young people about how that they were probably in the greatest mission field of their lives. And I want to say that to young people here today. When you're with other fellow students in school, it is the greatest opportunity for you to be shoulder to shoulder with people in your life. And so what a mission field. And so I would talk to our teenagers about know your culture and build bridges to the culture. But I would say this, it was a warning. Be a voice to a generation. Don't become the voice of a generation. Because we can get to know the culture and the generation so well that we become just like it and we're just a voice of a generation and not a voice to a generation. Jesus said, be in the world, but not of it. And I would talk to them about how a tow truck, have you ever seen a tow truck get down in the ditch with the vehicle it's trying to pull out of the ditch? No, it always stays on higher ground. And one young man in our youth group, I will never forget Ian because of what he did to me. Ian, he became friends with young people who loved going to raves. Do you know what a rave is? Okay, we're going to talk about it. Don't Google it yet, okay? We're going to talk about what a rave is. But I didn't know what a rave was. I'd heard about it. But here's the thing. Ian wanted his friends to know Jesus. He really did. And so he came to me one day. He had gotten to know all about raves. I don't know that he'd been to one yet, but he came to me all excited one day and he says, Gord, I've lined it up. You're speaking at a rave in 2 weeks. I said, what did you say? He said, you're speaking at a rave in 2 weeks. I said, oh, good. What I thought you said was I was speaking at a rave in 2 weeks. He said, yeah, you are. Aren't you excited? I'm something, but not excited. I was not excited about that. But here's the thing. Ian really wanted his friends to know Jesus. And I prayed for that. I thought I was going to pray for a couple of days. I prayed for maybe an hour, and I felt like God said, you got to come alongside your boy Ian. And so, what's a rave? Can I honestly tell you what I thought a rave was? I was picturing a bonfire at night with music, lots of drugs, and potentially, possibly, the sacrifice of animals. I honestly thought that's what was involved in a rave. I had no idea. Watch out for the cats and the rabbits and so on. With Ian's help, I looked carefully at their objects of worship. I wanted to understand. Well, this was the late 90s, so here's what it was at that time. It was 90s electronic, techno, dance music. That definitely involved drugs. But it's all a search for God. All a search for God. And I got to tell you, that event helped my prayer life like few things in my life ever have. Those 2 weeks leading up to that rave, I thought, what in the world? God, what am I going to speak to these kids about? And here's what God gave me, and I'm going to give you the whole 10-minute message in less than 1 minute, okay? And I borrowed a page from Paul on Mars Hill like you have no idea. I really did. I said something like this. I'm looking out here and I'm seeing only young people. And that's great because you won't be going to raves when you're my age. And I was in my mid-30s at the time, right? You want to get all this crazy dancing out of you when you're young because here's what happens. And then I pulled out this huge bottle that looked exactly like that. And then I pulled out a container, and maybe you've seen this before, but I filled it with these small rocks right to the top. And I said, is it full yet? And I heard a few kids go, yeah, it's full. And then I pulled out some really fine gravel. And I shook it, and I poured it, and I shook it, and I poured it. And now it was full. And I said, is it full yet? But they were smart. They caught on. They said, no, it's not full yet. And they were right, because I got fine sand. And I poured it in, and I shook it, and I poured it, and I shook it. I said, is it full yet? They were onto it. They knew. I brought some water, and I poured the water in. I said, is it full now? And it was so fun. They're all looking at each other. What do you think? It was full. Do you know that it took 2 very, very strong guys to even lift that thing afterwards? I said, what's the moral of this story? And they were pretty quiet, and then finally someone said, doesn't matter how busy life gets, you can always add something more. And you know what? I have done this on 3 occasions with young people, and that's the answer every time. It's such a Western mindset. No matter how full our schedule, we can always add something to it. But that's not the moral of the story. The moral of the story is, if you're ever going to put the big rocks in, you got to put them in first. You have to put them in first. And I said, there's nothing bigger in your life than your soul. It's going to live forever. And God is calling you by name, and he's telling you to do something now while you're young, while you have the opportunity. It's the most important thing in the world for you to do, in your life. Do it now while you're young. Here's what he wants you to do. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you say, life isn't pleasant anymore. And I shared the gospel for a few more minutes. It was one of the most unforgettable Mars Hill moments in my life. And I have prayed so often that it was for a couple of those kids there as well. Use the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar. Look what Paul says right in the middle there. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. What do you think that was about? That was them hedging their bets, right? Just in case we missed or offended any gods. This is our just in case God. Bases covered. I want to say 2 things about what Paul is saying by talking about this. Again, it doesn't mean, number 1, that he believes in the reality of idols or that he believes this is an unknown God. He's going to unpack that it is. He's going to use that as a bridge to talk about God. But I mentioned Aristotle last week because he lived right here in Athens. I took a couple of philosophy courses in university. One of my favorite Aristotle quotes is this. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. Ooh, I like that. That's what Paul's doing here. He's entertaining an idea without accepting it. So that's number 1. Number 2, when Paul said God here, he knew that his audience thought of a god, small g, like Zeus, or a god like Diana, or some other pagan god. They didn't think about the true God, capital G, named Yahweh, and he knew that. Listen, we too should assume that when we mention God to people, that they may not be having correct thoughts about God. And I know I've told this story here before, but there's new people here that probably haven't heard this. This is a true event that happened when we were in that same church in Guelph where my buddy Ian was. The ladies had a women's retreat, and it was one where they invited co-workers and neighbors and friends to it. And so this one friend of ours named Rose invited her neighbor on her street to it. And after the first session, where there was a speaker and singing and so on, the neighbor came to Rose, and here's what she said. She said, "So interesting. I'm putting it together. The foundation of what this is all about is that we are God." And Rose said, "How in the world did you arrive at that conclusion?" And she said, "Well, we sang that song, and like 3 times in the chorus, over and over, 'Be still and know that I am God. Be still.'" Like she heard that, and she thought, "Oh, that's what this is all about. Be still and know I'm God." Assume that people don't know. And that's what Paul's doing here. He's assuming they don't know. And I want to ask a question of you this morning. How do you know that what comes into your mind when you think about God is a correct thought about God? How do you know that? We need an objective standard. And we have one. It's God's Word. But most people in our culture do not have that objective standard. And many people, can I just say this, many people who call themselves Christians do not live by an objective standard because they may own a Bible, but they have not necessarily read it, studied it, and are not maybe walking out the Word of God. That's not being judgmental, that's just being observational through the years. A.W. Tozer said this, "What comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us." Look what Paul says about these philosophers, their thoughts about God. He says, "So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship." That's kind of a risky thing for him to say, wasn't it? You really don't know who you're worshiping, and they didn't. So Paul says, "This is what I'm going to proclaim to you." He uses the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar. Now, again, I want to be really practical. This may help some of us here this morning. If you're talking with a person who has struggled with alcohol in their life, and if you're in relationship with them, or even if it's a first-time conversation, and they happen to give you a key to their heart and tell you that they've struggled with alcohol, ask them if they know about or have ever heard of AA. Most people have. And if they have, or if they know about the AA program, you can start with the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar by talking about step number 2. And it's this, it's about their higher power. We came to believe that a power greater than us could restore us to sanity. And then ask them something like this: what do you think the higher or greater power is like? What do you think the greater power is like? Another question, has it ever communicated with you or with others? Another question, does it have a sense of right and wrong? Those are just really good questions to ask about the greater power. Give the person space to think about these questions, listen carefully like Paul did, and then invite them up onto the front porch for you to share who God really is, who Jesus really is, and what he's like. So when we're learning about what someone believes, use the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar. Third kind of thing in this strategy of evangelism, develop a biblical message clearly and carefully. This one is so important. Develop a biblical message clearly and carefully. Look at verse 24. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. Paul begins with God. Specifically, God the Creator. And he says humans didn't make God, God made humans. Humans didn't make God, God made everything. Look what he says, he made the world and everything in it, and he's the Lord of heaven and earth. Then Paul likely pointed to the many temples around him and he said, he doesn't live in a little shrine made by our human hands. You gotta love Paul's boldness, right? He doesn't just stop at what's common and the unknown God, but he now clearly points out the differences. God created. And he lives outside of creation. What's Paul doing here? He's creating a contrast between their faith in God, small g, and true faith in God, capital G, and he's laying the groundwork for the gospel. He doesn't begin with, you need Jesus, because he doesn't assume that they know anything about Jesus yet. Notice the development again of Paul's theme. Look at verse 25. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else, from God the Creator to God the Sustainer. You see the progression here? Everything we have comes from him. He's the giver, and he needs nothing given to him. He's self-sufficient. I want to ask you a question. Who serves whom? The Creator or the created? Anyone here ever done any woodworking? Okay, I know Ed has for sure. Some have. Okay, has anyone ever built furniture? You say, does IKEA count? Yes, IKEA counts. Okay, does anyone? All right. Look at all those furniture builders. All right. So, do you now serve that table you put together, or does that table serve you? Right? Does the closet you put together, whatever, portable closet, does it serve you, or do you serve it? You think of car manufacturers. Now that we have automobiles, do we serve cars or do they serve us? How about computers? You say, oh, computers, I don't know. My computer doesn't serve me very well. Hey, how about AI? Artificial intelligence. That's the big conversation, right? Is it going to serve us or are we going to serve it? Who's going to be in control? In the Bible, it talks about the potter or the clay. Us or God. I hate to break the news to you, but your personal opinions and my personal opinions about God matter very little. He's the author and sustainer of all life, including yours and mine, and he doesn't need help from you to run his universe or your life or mine. The amazing thing is, he invites it. He invites us to work with him. And he'll work with us when we invite him to work with us. So look at verse 26, the development again. From one man, he made all the nations. Now, I got to pause in the middle of that verse and say, you will have some real problems with this statement. In God's word, if you don't believe in a literal Adam, in Genesis 1 through 5. I'm just saying. He's saying here, from one man, he made all the nations. Paul stands with the author of Genesis and believes in a literal man named Adam. Not a literately constructed man, as we're hearing in the church a lot today. Not a figurative man named Adam, but a literal man named Adam. That's what this verse is saying. So a bit of philosophical reasoning here. Personally, I'm with Paul. And Paul's with the author of Genesis. The author of Genesis is with God. That makes me with God. Where are you at? Where are you at with this issue of Adam being a real person? It's an important question to think about because, again, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. Well, notice furthermore what Paul says about God. From one man, God made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their land. Do you realize that our place and time in history is God's doing? That's what this means. Now, having said that, have you ever thought that you'd like to live in another time in another place? Have you ever fantasized about, living at some other point in time in life? Feel free to just shout out, say, first century Greece, or 19th century Fergus, or like wherever. Just go ahead, shout out. What's a place and time you would...
I'd like to meet Paul.
Sorry?
I'd like to meet the Apostle Paul.
Like to have lived when Paul lived. Anyone else?
When Jesus was alive.
Okay, the times of Christ. Anyone else? Middle Ages, anyone? No? Okay. All right. Well, this is good. I Googled modern day people who live in a different era. There's plenty who do. Who live as though it's like many, many years ago. That's a thing. And of course, we live right down the road from a whole community living in another time, don't we? This is not an uncommon sight, especially on the rural back roads in Waterloo region. And sometimes right in town. This is a picture similar to the buggy garage at the Dollar Tree Mall at Northfield and Weber. And here's my favorite photo. Here's my favorite. It's like, we want to live in the past, but we love kayaking. Especially colorful kayaking. Now, none of what I've just said is a put down. That's a life preference. However, this is still true, that he marked out our appointed times in history. And I just want to ask, in case anyone has ever wondered if you were born in the wrong time, in the wrong place, to the wrong family. Can you say, God, you're God, and I'm not. I accept the time and the place in history and in the world that you have me, at least for now. And I'm going to bloom where I'm planted. I will love God and I will love people right here in this generation where you have me. That's what Paul's saying. Well, Paul continues to develop a biblical message clearly and carefully. Look at verse 27. Why did God do this? God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far away from any one of us. Wow, I read that. It's just amazing. There's something to learn here about our part in salvation. First of all, who initiates it? God does, right? God did this so that. God always makes the first move. I'm feeling quite obviously nostalgic today, being my anniversary. But I was thinking this morning about how when I was a little kid of 6.5 years old, and I went to church that Sunday morning, and I had no thought about my need for God, no thought about, I'm a sinful little person at all. But God initiated that morning through a Sunday school teacher with a question, with a simple question, and that just detonated something in my heart. And for the next 24 hours, I was in soul trouble, wanting to know that I was forgiven of my sins. God initiated that. God did that so that, what's the first step on our part? So that we seek him. That we seek God. Have you done that? Have you had a time in your life when you were seeking the Lord? I hope every one of us are seeking the Lord right now for lots of things in our life. And then what's the second step? So that we would reach out for him. Have you done that? Have you reached out for him? How does someone reach out to God? We hear these terms, but how do we do it? We simply talk to God. Ask God to be real to you. Invite Jesus to enter your life and be real to you. Ask God's Spirit to come and take over. Can I tell you, as a believer who's been on the road for a very long time, I have learned recently about just the reality of calling out to God when I'm in need. I've noticed, lately that when I felt a temptation coming on, like coming on kind of strong, I'll just get somewhere where no one else can hear me, and out loud I'll say, in the name of Jesus, I command whatever kind of demonic force is coming against me right now and bringing temptation in my life to get out of my life right now, in Jesus' name. And I invite the Holy Spirit to just take control right now. Wow, the power of that. At the invitation, God will come when we seek him and reach out for him like that. I commend that to you, to do that. And then look what it says, and we find him. We find him. We find him. I know I've told this story before, and I'll tell the briefest part of it, but when my dad passed away in his sleep at age 65, and after my family had gathered around and we cried and hugged and prayed together, and then Karen took our kids to school, I was alone in my office, and I fell to my knees and then to my face, and I just began weeping. Like, just I was starting to thaw my emotions that the reality, my dad is gone. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to him, and it was just horrible. And I was weeping before the Lord, and I cried out to him, and I literally said, God, would you please shine your light into this darkness right now? And he did. He gave me a vision of my dad dancing before the Lord. And my dad didn't dance. He was a broken man. As a young boy, his dad was very distant emotionally. His mom had a secret affair going on for years that produced a little brother. And the whole family knew about it but never talked about it. Very dysfunctional. And then when my dad was a young man, his parents divorced. And there was a broken boy inside of my dad. And at age 23, he met the Lord. But he hadn't done the work to see that little boy healed. And so when my dad died, and when God gave me that vision of him dancing before the Lord, I also saw that little boy was healed. That brokenness was just gone. And he was dancing before the Lord. And can I tell you that the tears and weeping for sorrow turned into weeping for joy? That hasn't left. Still have so much joy about my dad being at home with the Lord. Do I miss him? On the 20th anniversary, I asked God, would you please give my dad a hug from me? Like, I miss him. Can't wait to see him. But the joy of the Lord has been my strength through all these years. It's real. It's real. We can find him when we seek him and reach out to him. But the amazing thing is this, he's not far from any one of us. He's not far from any one of us, from you. He's knowable. He wants to be known by you. He wants you to know that he knows you. He wants a relationship. Well, just bringing this in for a landing, this was brand new information to these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. I was thinking this week, they had ABC religion, anything but Christ. And he's about to give them the gospel invitation to Jesus. He's not there yet. So what have we learned about Paul's evangelism strategy with this particular non-church cultured crowd? Number one, begin where people are. 2, use the familiar as a bridge to the unfamiliar. 3, develop a biblical message clearly and carefully. I don't know if you figured it out, but guess what? I'm going to have to wear the shirt one more time. We're going to have part 3 because there's 4 more lessons in this strategy with Paul. He's not quite done yet. Let's pray. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for this passage of Scripture that is so like the time in which we live, God. People who don't know you. And for this opportunity we have in this generation to be like Paul on Mars Hill and to build bridges and to share your love and the love of Jesus in coming to rescue us. So Father, may we be inspired by your word. May we be hungry to know more about how we can apply it to our lives. God, we thank you for the reality that you are not far from any one of us. Right now, Lord, whatever's going on in anyone's life, may they reach out to you. May they seek you, search for you, find you, and experience your presence. And Lord, if anyone here needs to have someone come alongside them and speak with them or pray with them, may they have boldness to do that today, whether it's online or here in person. I just pray, Lord, that we would have a deep connection with you as a result of this morning. We pray this in Jesus' name and for his glory. Amen.